The recruits at Munich's elite tactical training academy watched the petite blonde woman stumble through basic combat drills, barely able to hold her rifle steady. What they didn't know was that Elara Novak had once led classified Delta Force operations in Syria that saved hundreds of lives, and she was about to remind them why underestimating quiet women is always a mistake. Elara Novak adjusted the oversized tactical vest that hung loosely on her small frame as she stood in line with 30 other recruits at the Munich Elite Tactical Training Academy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 25, with shoulder-length blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose, she looked more like a university student who had wandered into the wrong building than someone pursuing advanced security training. Other recruits, mostly men in their 30s and 40s with military backgrounds, barely acknowledged her presence. When they did glance her way, their expressions ranged from mild amusement to outright skepticism. She'd grown accustomed to these looks over the past 3 years since returning to civilian life in Germany, her mother's homeland. "All right, listen up," barked Instructor Weber, a former German Special Forces operator whose reputation preceded him. "This is week 1 of our 12-week advanced personal protection course. Half of you won't make it to graduation. The other half will become some of the most sought-after security professionals in Europe." Elara kept her eyes down, focusing on the worn notebook in her hands where she'd been sketching tactical diagrams that she quickly covered with random doodles when anyone looked her way. The Academy's brochure had promised comprehensive training in executive protection, threat assessment, and tactical response, which sounded perfect for someone supposedly starting their security career from scratch. What the brochure didn't mention was that the Academy catered primarily to former military personnel and police officers looking to transition into high-paying private security roles. Most students arrived with years of relevant experience and the confidence that came with it. Elara had deliberately chosen this program precisely because she would blend in as the obvious outsider, the inexperienced civilian who everyone would assume was in over her head. "Novak." Weber's voice cut through her thoughts. "You're up first." For weapon familiarization. The instructor gestured toward a table lined with various firearms, from basic pistols to assault rifles. Around her, Elara felt the other recruits' attention focus on her, with the kind of anticipatory amusement reserved for watching someone fail spectacularly. She approached the table hesitantly, her movements deliberately awkward as she reached for a standard Glock 17. Her hands appeared to shake slightly as she attempted to check the chamber, fumbling with the slide mechanism in a way that made several recruits exchange knowing glances. "Have you ever held a firearm before, Fräulein Novak?" Weber asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "I took a basic course in Prague last year," Elara replied in accented English, her voice soft and uncertain. "But I'm still learning the fundamentals." It wasn't technically a lie. She had taken a basic civilian course in Prague, though that was after completing advanced weapons training with some of the world's most elite special forces operators. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now pretending to struggle with equipment she could disassemble and reassemble blindfolded as she raised the unloaded weapon toward the target range. Her stance was textbook amateur feet too close together, shoulders hunched, grip inconsistent. She squeezed the trigger several times, the clicking of the firing pin against empty chambers echoing in the sudden quiet of the training hall. "Interesting technique," muttered Hans, a former police officer standing nearby. "Very creative." The comment drew quiet chuckles from the group, and Elara felt her cheeks flush with what appeared to be embarrassment. In reality, she was calculating sight adjustments, wind factors, and optimal breathing patterns, the kind of automatic assessments that came from years of high-stakes marksmanship training. Weber stepped closer, his expression a mixture of professional patience and barely concealed exasperation. "Miss Novak, you're going to need significant remedial training if you hope to pass this course. Personal protection work requires absolute precision with firearms." "I understand, instructor," Elara replied, lowering the weapon carefully. "I'm willing to put in extra practice time." What she didn't mention was that during her Delta Force deployment, she'd achieved sniper qualification scores that ranked in the top 5% of all special operations personnel. Her supposed creative technique was actually a deliberately degraded version of advanced shooting stances designed to throw off anyone who might recognize proper form. As the session continued with other recruits demonstrating significantly more competent handling of the weapons, Elara maintained her role as the struggling amateur. She asked basic questions about safety protocols she'd been following for years, took careful notes on information she could recite from memory, and generally projected an image of someone who was enthusiastic, but clearly out of her depth. During the lunch break, she sat alone at a corner table, eating a simple sandwich while reviewing training materials that covered tactics she'd used in actual combat situations. The other recruits had formed natural clusters based on their shared military or law enforcement backgrounds, discussing previous deployments and comparing experiences that Elara couldn't acknowledge sharing. "You know," said Klaus, a former Army sergeant who had approached her table, "if you're really serious about this career path, you might want to consider starting with a more basic program. This course is designed for people with relevant experience." His tone wasn't unkind, but it carried the patronizing quality of someone offering advice to someone they viewed as fundamentally unprepared. Elara looked up from her notes, blinking owlishly behind her glasses. "I appreciate the suggestion," she said quietly, "but I've already paid the tuition, and I'd like to see how far I can get." Klaus shrugged and returned to his group, where Elara caught fragments of conversation about the blonde girl who's going to wash out by week 3. She continued eating her sandwich, allowing herself a small internal smile, while maintaining her carefully constructed facade of naive determination. That afternoon would bring hand-to-hand combat training, and Elara was already planning how to disguise 15 years of martial arts training and Delta Force close quarters combat expertise as beginner's luck and natural athleticism. She had no idea that her carefully maintained cover was about to be tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. The hand-to-hand combat session began in the Academy's main training hall, a spacious room lined with practice mats and equipped with heavy bags, grappling dummies, and various training apparatus. Instructor Weber had been joined by Maria Santos, a compact woman with the fluid movements of someone who had spent years perfecting her craft in real-world situations. "Today we're covering basic defensive techniques," Santos announced, her slight Spanish accent adding authority to her words. "In personal protection work, your primary goal is always to remove your client from danger, not to engage in extended combat. However, you must be capable of creating separation when escape routes are blocked." Elara positioned herself at the back of the group, maintaining her pattern of trying to blend into the background. She'd changed into standard training gear, loose fitting pants and a plain t-shirt that concealed the lean muscle definition she'd maintained despite 3 years of civilian life. The first hour covered basic escapes from common grabs and holds. Santos demonstrated proper leverage points, escape angles, and the importance of using an attacker's momentum against them. Elara followed along with the rest of the group, carefully moderating her movements to appear competent but unremarkable. "Pair up for practice," Santos instructed. "We'll rotate partners every 15 minutes to work with different body types and strength levels." Elara found herself partnered with Dmitry, a broad-shouldered Russian who had introduced himself as former Spetsnaz during the morning introductions. At nearly 6'4", he towered over her 5'6" frame, making their size differential particularly pronounced. "I will go easy," Dmitry said in heavily accented English, his tone suggesting he was doing her a favor. This is just for learning, yes? As they worked through the prescribed techniques, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elara allowed him to successfully execute several holds while she demonstrated appropriately amateur responses. She made her escapes look more difficult than they should have been, occasionally asking for clarification on grip placement or foot positioning. The routine disruption came 20 minutes before the scheduled end of the session. Santos had called the group together to demonstrate a more advanced technique defense against a rear choke hold. She was explaining the importance of dropping your center of gravity when the Academy's fire alarm began blaring throughout the building. "Evacuation drill," Weber announced over the piercing sound. "Everyone outside to the assembly point. Leave everything except essential personal items." The group began moving toward the exit in an orderly fashion, but as they reached the main corridor, the lights suddenly cut out. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting long shadows and creating a disorienting strobe effect. That's when they heard the shouting from the building's main entrance. "Security breach. We have an active intruder situation." The voice belonged to Marcus, one of the Academy's administrative staff. "This is not a drill." The corridor erupted into controlled chaos. The former military personnel immediately began implementing tactical movements, creating defensive positions and attempting to establish sight lines. Several recruits reached for cell phones to call for backup. In the darkness and confusion, no one noticed that Elara had gone completely still. Her breathing had shifted to a controlled pattern she'd learned during Delta Force training. Her eyes were rapidly adjusting to the low light conditions, and her mind was automatically cataloging exit routes, potential weapons, and defensive positions. Years of high-stress training had conditioned her to achieve clarity in exactly these moments of crisis. The shouting grew closer, and they could hear heavy footsteps moving through the building's main hallway. Weber was attempting to coordinate an evacuation when the lights flickered back on, revealing a figure in dark clothing moving toward their position. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as happening too fast to follow clearly. The intruder, later identified as a disgruntled former student with known mental health issues, rounded the corner carrying what appeared to be a weapon. Several recruits shouted warnings and began scrambling for cover behind available barriers. But Elara was already moving. Her body shifted from the awkward posture she'd maintained all day into something entirely different. She flowed across the corridor with fluid precision, closing the distance to the intruder in seconds. Her movements were economical, purposeful, and executed with a level of tactical awareness that seemed to come from years of specialized training. The petite confrontation lasted less than 10 seconds. When the confusion settled, the intruder was on the ground, effectively restrained, and his weapon, revealed to be a realistic training pistol, was secured. Elara stood over him, her breathing controlled and her positioning textbook tactical, maintaining visual contact with potential threats while securing the immediate area. The hall fell silent except for the sound of approaching sirens as local law enforcement responded to the Academy's emergency call. "What the hell was that?" Klaus whispered, staring at Elara with an expression of complete bewilderment. Weber approached slowly, his eyes fixed on Elara's stance and the professional manner in which she'd handled the situation. As a former Special Forces operator himself, he recognized certain aspects of her response that didn't align with civilian training. "Miss Novak," he said carefully, "that was an interesting demonstration of defensive techniques." Elara looked around at the circle of faces staring at her, suddenly aware that her carefully maintained cover had just sustained significant damage. The shy, uncertain woman who had struggled with basic weapon handling that morning had just neutralized a potential threat with the kind of efficiency that took years to develop. I don't know what happened," she said, her voice returning to the soft, uncertain tone she'd maintained all day. It was just instinct. But even as she spoke, she could see the questions forming in Weber's eyes, and she knew that her quiet, civilian facade was about to face its first serious challenge. The police questioning took nearly 2 hours, during which Elara maintained her cover story with practiced ease. She explained her actions as a combination of adrenaline, basic self-defense classes, and pure luck. The responding officers seemed satisfied with her account, especially given the testimony of witnesses who confirmed she had acted to neutralize a legitimate threat. But Weber wasn't finished with his questions. As the other recruits were dismissed for the day, he asked Elara to remain behind for what he termed a routine follow-up discussion. They sat in his small office adjacent to the main training hall, surrounded by commendations, military photographs, and tactical manuals that represented his 20-year career in German Special Forces. That was quite a response for someone with minimal training, Weber began, his tone conversational but his eyes sharp with professional assessment. Your reaction time was exceptional. Elara shifted uncomfortably in her chair, maintaining the nervous energy she'd projected all day. I think it was just shock. Sometimes people react differently under pressure. Indeed they do, Weber agreed. But your positioning after neutralizing the threat was particularly interesting. You maintained visual contact with potential escape routes, kept the weapon secured at a safe distance, and established a defensive perimeter around the subdued individual. He leaned forward slightly, watching her reaction. Those are tactical considerations that typically require extensive training to execute automatically under stress. I watch a lot of action movies, Elara replied with a self-conscious laugh. Maybe I picked up more than I realized. Weber's expression suggested he found that explanation less than convincing. But before he could press further, his phone rang. The conversation was brief and conducted in rapid German, but Elara caught enough to understand that the intruder had been identified as a former student with documented mental health issues, who had been making threats against the academy for several months. Where did you say you took your basic firearms course? Weber asked when he ended the call. Prague, Elara replied, a civilian shooting range. I can provide the name if you need it for your records. And your background before deciding to pursue security work? This was the question she'd been preparing for since the day she'd enrolled. I studied international relations at Charles University in Prague. After graduation, I worked in various administrative positions, but I wanted something more challenging. Security work seemed like an opportunity to travel and use practical skills. It was a carefully constructed backstory that would hold up to basic verification. She had indeed studied at Charles University, though her degree was in linguistics, with a focus on Middle Eastern languages, a detail that had made her particularly valuable to certain specialized military units. Administrative work, Weber repeated thoughtfully. What kind of administrative positions? Event coordination mostly. Some translation work for international conferences. Another partial truth. She had done translation work, though it had involved intercepted communications and tactical briefings rather than corporate conferences. Weber made notes in her file, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with her answers. Miss Novak, I've been training security professionals for 8 years. In that time, I've seen hundreds of students respond to simulated stress situations. What you demonstrated today wasn't luck or adrenaline. He paused, studying her face for any telltale reactions. Your movement patterns, your tactical awareness, your ability to assess and neutralize a threat. These are skills that take years to develop and require constant practice to maintain. Elara felt sweat beading on her forehead, despite the cool temperature in the office. Instructor Weber, I understand this might seem unusual, but I really don't have any formal combat training. Maybe I have natural reflexes, or maybe the basic courses I took were more comprehensive than I realized. Perhaps, Weber said, though his tone indicated he wasn't convinced. I'll be watching your progress with particular interest over the coming weeks. As Elara gathered her belongings and prepared to leave, Weber called after her. One more thing, Miss Novak. During the incident today, you called out a tactical warning in what sounded like Arabic. Do you speak Arabic? The question hit her like a physical blow. In the heat of the moment, years of operational conditioning had overridden her civilian facade. She'd shouted a warning to clear the area in Arabic specifically, in the dialect she'd learned during her Middle Eastern deployments. I don't speak Arabic, she said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than it felt. Maybe you misheard in all the confusion. Weber's eyes narrowed slightly. Perhaps I did. Have a good evening, Miss Novak. As Elara left the academy and walked toward the nearby metro station, she knew her carefully constructed cover story was beginning to show cracks. Weber was clearly suspicious, and his background gave him the knowledge to recognize inconsistencies that civilian instructors might miss. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Interesting day at the academy. We should talk, Kay. The message sent a chill down her spine. Only a handful of people knew she was in Munich, and fewer still knew about her current identity. The signature K could refer to several individuals from her operational past, none of whom should have been able to track her down. She deleted the message and quickened her pace toward the train station, her mind racing through contingency plans she'd hoped never to use. The quiet civilian life she'd built over the past 3 years was starting to unravel, and she had the distinct feeling that today's incident at the academy was just the beginning. As the metro carried her back toward her modest apartment in Munich's Schwabing district, Elara stared at her reflection in the darkened window and wondered how long she could maintain her charade before someone with the right knowledge and resources decided to dig deeper into the past of the unassuming woman who had just demonstrated Delta Force-level tactical skills in response to a security threat. The game was becoming more dangerous, and she wasn't sure how many more unconscious reveals her cover story could survive. Weber spent the evening reviewing security footage from the Academy's surveillance system. The cameras had captured every angle of the incident, and what he saw confirmed his growing suspicions about Elara Novak. He watched the sequence repeatedly, noting details that only someone with his background would recognize. Her initial response time was inhuman. She had begun moving toward the threat before most people had even processed what was happening. Her approach pattern followed advanced tactical doctrine, using cover and concealment in ways that suggested years of specialized training. Most telling was her post-engagement behavior, the systematic securing of the area, the professional restraint techniques, and the way she had maintained situational awareness even while subduing the intruder. The next morning, Weber arrived at the academy early and made several phone calls to contacts within European security services. His inquiries were subtle, asking about training programs in Prague, checking on international exchange programs that might explain advanced skills in young civilians, and requesting background verification on students who showed unusual tactical awareness. When Elara arrived for the second day of training, she found Weber waiting by the equipment room with a manila folder tucked under his arm. "Good morning, Miss Novak," he said, his tone professionally neutral. "I've been reviewing yesterday's incident for our official report." Elara felt her stomach tighten, but maintained her carefully practiced civilian demeanor. "Of course, instructor. I hope I didn't cause any complications with my reaction." "On the contrary," Weber replied, studying her face carefully. "Your response was exemplary. In fact, it was so exemplary that I've been trying to understand how someone with your limited background could execute such advanced techniques." He opened the folder and pulled out several printed photographs, still frames from the security footage. "These images show your movement patterns during the incident. Would you mind walking me through your thought process?" Elara looked at the photographs, seeing herself captured in moments of tactical precision, that she couldn't explain away as luck or instinct. In one frame, she was using a textbook approach angle that minimized her exposure to potential additional threats. In another, her hand positioning during the restraint showed knowledge of advanced control techniques taught only in specialized military programs. "I'm not sure I understand," she said slowly. "It all happened so fast. I was mostly acting on impulse." "Impulse," Weber repeated thoughtfully. "This particular impulse," he pointed to a photograph showing her establishing a defensive perimeter, "is taught in advanced tactical training programs. Specifically, it's part of the curriculum for Special Operations Forces." Elara's mouth went dry, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. "Maybe I saw something similar in a movie or video game. People pick up things from all kinds of sources these days." Weber set the photographs aside and pulled out a different document. "I made some inquiries about the shooting range in Prague, where you said you took your basic firearms course. They have no record of anyone named Elara Novak completing their program." The statement hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Elara felt her carefully constructed identity beginning to crumble, but she couldn't afford to break character now. "That's strange," she said, injecting confusion into her voice. "Maybe they use a different record-keeping system, or perhaps I'm misremembering the name of the facility. I took the course about 2 years ago." "Perhaps," Weber said, though his expression made it clear he didn't believe her explanation. "I also contacted Charles University to verify your academic records. Interesting institution. They have excellent programs in international relations." Elara nodded, hoping her relief didn't show. Her university records were legitimate, carefully maintained as part of her deep cover identity. "However," Weber continued, "I spoke with Professor Kowalski in the International Relations Department. He mentioned that they've had very few students focus on Middle Eastern studies in recent years. Most of their graduates pursue careers in European Union institutions or multinational corporations." The comment seemed casual, but Elara recognized it as a probe. Weber was fishing for information about her language skills and regional knowledge areas where her operational background might show through her civilian facade. "I was always interested in that region," she replied carefully. "The political complexities, the cultural dynamics. It seemed like an important area to understand." "Indeed it is," Weber agreed. Dr. Kowalski also mentioned that students with serious academic interest in Middle Eastern affairs typically pursue language studies as well. "Did you study Arabic or Farsi during your university years?" The question was a trap, and Elara knew it. Weber had clearly heard her Arabic warning during yesterday's incident and was trying to get her to admit to language skills that would be difficult to explain for a civilian student. "I took some basic Arabic classes," she said, opting for a partial truth. "Just conversational level, nothing advanced." Weber made a note in his folder, "conversational level." "That's interesting, because the phrase you used yesterday during the incident was quite specific. Intabi, Mantika Katar. Attention, danger zone. That's tactical terminology, not conversational Arabic." Elara felt ice in her veins but forced herself to look puzzled. "I'm sorry, but I don't remember saying anything in Arabic." "Are you sure you heard correctly in all the confusion?" "Security footage has audio, Miss Novak. Would you like me to play the recording?" The threat was clear, and Elara realized she was running out of maneuvering room. Weber had evidence that contradicted her story, and his military background gave him the knowledge to interpret what he was seeing. She needed to give him something, a plausible explanation that might satisfy his suspicions without revealing the full extent of her background. That evening, Elara sat in her apartment methodically reviewing her contingency plans. The modest 2-bedroom flat in Munich's Schwabing district had been chosen specifically for its strategic advantages: multiple exit routes, proximity to public transportation, and neighbors who valued privacy over curiosity. She'd lived there for 2 years without incident, but now everything felt different. Her phone rang at precisely 9:47 p.m. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the timing matched operational protocols she'd learned years ago. "Guten Abend, Elara," said a voice she recognized immediately. Catherine "Kit" Morrison, her former handler, and the only person who used that particular mixture of German greeting with her operational name. "Kit," Elara said quietly, not bothering to deny recognition. "I was wondering when you'd make contact. Your little performance at the training academy yesterday was quite impressive. Also quite visible to anyone monitoring European security networks for unusual tactical displays." Elara closed her eyes, realizing that her exposure was wider than she'd feared. How many people know? Currently? A very small circle. But that circle is growing, and it includes some individuals who have been very interested in your whereabouts for the past 3 years. The next morning at the academy, Elara implemented a carefully planned deflection strategy. She arrived early and approached Weber before the day's training began. "Instructor Weber," she said, "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I realize I may have given you the wrong impression about my background." Weber looked up from his training notes. "How so?" "When I mentioned working for Titan Security Solutions, I may have overstated my role there. I was primarily in administrative support, coordinating training schedules, maintaining equipment inventories, that sort of thing. The tactical knowledge I picked up was mostly observational." It was a deliberate downgrade of her story, designed to make her skills seem more like absorbed knowledge rather than hands-on training. She wanted Weber to think she was minimizing her background rather than concealing it. "Administrative support," Weber repeated. "Yet you were able to execute advanced restraint techniques under stress." "I attended a lot of training sessions as part of my administrative duties. I suppose I absorbed more than I realized." Elara shrugged with practiced self-deprecation. "Maybe I have a good memory for physical movements." Weber studied her for a moment. "Miss Novak, I contacted Titan Security Solutions last night. They confirmed your employment, but the details they provided suggest your role was more substantial than administrative support." During the morning's training session, Elara deliberately dialed back her performance. She asked basic questions about techniques she'd mastered years ago, struggled with equipment she could operate blindfolded, and generally projected the image of someone whose previous experience was helpful but limited. When paired with Dmitry for hand-to-hand combat practice, she allowed him to successfully execute holds and throws that she could have easily countered. She made her escapes look effortful and asked for multiple demonstrations of techniques she understood perfectly. "You are improving," Dmitry commented during a break. "Yesterday was maybe beginner's luck, yes? But today you show real learning." "I think yesterday was mostly adrenaline," Elara replied, exactly as she'd planned. "Today feels more like actual skill development." After class, as she was leaving the building, Weber called out to her, "Miss Novak, one more question. During your time at Titan Security, did you ever work on contracts involving Middle Eastern clients or assignments?" The question seemed casual, but Elara recognized it as another probe into her language skills and regional knowledge. She needed to give him an answer that would explain her Arabic capabilities without revealing their true source. "A few times," she said carefully. "Titan had some corporate clients with business interests in the region. I helped coordinate security assessments for their facilities. Basic translation work mostly. Corporate security assessments," Weber nodded. "That would explain some of your tactical awareness. Those contracts often require understanding of regional threat environments." As she walked away from the academy, Elara felt cautiously optimistic that her deflection strategy was working. Weber's questions suggested curiosity rather than suspicion, and her fellow students seemed to have accepted her revised background story. But her phone buzzed with another text message. "Deflection noted. clock still ticking. Kay, the quiet civilian. Life she'd built in Munich was definitely over. The only question now was what would replace it. Elara's apartment felt different when she returned that evening, not physically altered, but charged with the tension of secrets about to be exposed. She sat at her small kitchen table, staring at a photograph she kept hidden behind other papers. In her desk drawer, the image showed her with her younger sister Anya, taken 3 years ago during their last meeting in Prague. Anya was now 22, completing her master's degree in international development at the University of Vienna. She had no idea that her older sister had spent 5 years conducting classified operations in some of the world's most dangerous locations. As far as Anya knew, Elara worked in corporate consulting and lived a quiet, unremarkable life in Munich. The sisters had maintained their relationship through carefully scheduled visits and regular video calls. But Elara had always been cautious about keeping Anya separate from her operational life. Now, with surveillance teams tracking her movements and former handlers demanding decisions about her future, that separation was becoming impossible to maintain. Her phone buzzed with an incoming video call from Vienna. Anya's face appeared on the screen, bright and animated as always. "Ella," Anya said, using the childhood nickname that no one else was allowed to use. "I have incredible news. Professor Kellner recommended me for a research position with the International Development Consortium. They want me to work on infrastructure projects in post-conflict regions." Elara felt her heart sink even as she forced a smile. "That's wonderful, Anya. You've worked so hard for this opportunity." The position would involve field work in several countries, including some places in the Middle East. Can you believe it? Me, working on projects that could actually help rebuild communities. The irony was crushing. Anya's idealistic desire to help rebuild regions that Elara had operated in during some of the most classified missions of her career created a dangerous intersection between her two lives. "Have you considered the security implications?" Elara asked carefully. "Some of those regions can be quite dangerous." "Of course I have," Anya replied with the confident enthusiasm of someone who had studied conflict from academic perspectives, but never experienced it firsthand. "The consortium has excellent security protocols. Besides, this is exactly the kind of work I've been preparing for." Elara watched her sister's excited expression and realized that Anya's career ambitions were about to collide with the very world Elara had tried to leave behind. If certain people discovered the connection between them, Anya could become leverage in whatever political games were being played around Elara's status. "When would this position start?" Elara asked. "That's the best part. If I accept, I'd begin training next month. There's a preparatory course in Munich, actually. We could see each other more often." Munich. Elara's carefully compartmentalized life was about to collapse entirely. Having Anya in the same city while surveillance teams were tracking her movements would put her sister directly in harm's way. "Anya," Elara said slowly, "have you made a final decision about accepting this position?" "Not yet, but I'm definitely leaning toward yes. Why? You don't think I should take it?" Elara stared at her sister's trusting face and felt the weight of every decision she'd made over the past 3 years. She'd chosen to disappear from her operational life partly to protect Anya from the complexities and dangers of her work. Now that choice might not be enough. "I think you should be very careful about any position that involves international travel to high-risk regions," Elara said. "Sometimes academic institutions don't fully understand the realities of field conditions." "Ella, you worry too much. This is my career. We're talking about my chance to make a real difference in the world." After ending the call, Elara sat in the darkness of her apartment, weighing impossible options. If she activated one of her contingency identities and disappeared, she would lose contact with Anya indefinitely. If she surrendered to Kit's demands and returned to operational status, she might be able to protect her sister, but would have to give up any hope of civilian life. The third option was the most dangerous. She could try to resolve the situation on her own terms, using her skills and knowledge to eliminate the threats to both her freedom and her sister's safety. But that would mean returning to the world of violence and deception she tried to leave behind. Her laptop chimed with an encrypted message from an address she didn't recognize. The content was brief but chilling. Elara Novakova, University of Vienna, International Development Program. Interesting family connections. We should discuss mutual interests. Someone had identified her sister and was using that knowledge as leverage. The message confirmed Elara's worst fears. Her attempt to maintain separation between her two lives had failed, and Anya was now a target. Elara opened her secure communication software and composed a message to Kit. "We need to meet tonight. The situation has escalated beyond acceptable parameters." The response came within minutes. "Understood. Standard protocols." 1 hour. As she prepared to leave her apartment, Elara realized she was facing the same type of impossible choice that had defined her operational career: the need to sacrifice something precious in order to protect something even more important. 3 years ago, she'd chosen to sacrifice her military career to protect her sanity and her family relationships. Now she might have to sacrifice her civilian life to protect Anya. She retrieved a small metal box from behind the false back of her bedroom closet. Inside were items she'd hoped never to use again: encrypted communication devices, untraceable credit cards, and a compact pistol with spare ammunition. As she secured these items in her jacket, she felt the familiar weight of operational responsibility settling back onto her shoulders. The woman who had spent 3 years pretending to be an ordinary civilian was about to remember exactly why. She'd been one of Delta Force's most effective operators. But this time, the mission wasn't about serving her country or following orders. It was about protecting the one person who mattered more to her than anything else in the world. Weber arrived at his office at 5:30 a.m., 2 hours before the academy's normal opening time. The building was empty except for security guards, giving him the privacy he needed for the inquiries he was about to make. His military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct was telling him that Elara Novak was far more than she appeared to be. He began with official channels, calling contacts within the German Federal Police and asking about any reports of unusual tactical training demonstrations by civilians. The response was immediate and concerning 3 different agencies had flagged yesterday's incident at the academy as potentially significant, and 2 had requested copies of the security footage. Why the interest? Weber asked his contact at the BKA, Germany's Federal Criminal Police. "We've had some inquiries from international partners about individuals with advanced tactical training operating under civilian cover," came the reply. "Your student's performance yesterday matches certain profiles we've been asked to monitor." Weber felt a chill as he realized that Elara's situation might involve intelligence services rather than simple identity fraud. He ended the call and began a more systematic investigation, using resources that his position as a former KSK operator gave him access to. His first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former colleague, now working for the Austrian Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, returned his call with information about Titan Security Solutions, the company Elara claimed to have worked for. "Interesting, you should ask about them," his contact said. "Titan has been flagged in several investigations over the past 2 years. They appear to be a legitimate security firm, but they've been linked to operations that involve former Special Forces personnel working under unofficial cover." "What kind of operations?" "The kind that governments use when they need deniability. Corporate security contracts that are actually intelligence-gathering missions. Training programs that are really talent recruitment for classified operations. That sort of thing." Weber made careful notes as his contact continued. If your student really worked for Titan, she either knows more than she's telling you, or she was used without understanding the full scope of their operations. The second phase of Weber's investigation focused on Elara's academic background. Charles University in Prague was legitimate, and her enrollment records checked out. But Weber noticed some interesting details when he spoke directly with faculty members. Professor Kowalski from the International Relations Department remembered Elara, but his description didn't match the uncertain woman Weber had been training. Very sharp student, Kowalski said. Exceptional analytical skills, particularly regarding Middle Eastern political structures. She wrote her thesis on post-conflict reconstruction strategies, quite sophisticated work that demonstrated unusual insight into operational realities. Operational realities? Her understanding of how military and civilian agencies coordinate during stabilization operations. Most students approach these topics theoretically, but Miss Novak wrote with the kind of practical knowledge that usually comes from field experience. Weber asked for a copy of her thesis, and what he read confirmed his growing suspicions. The paper demonstrated detailed knowledge of military doctrine, interagency coordination protocols, and regional political dynamics that went far beyond academic study. By mid-morning, Weber had assembled a profile that contradicted nearly everything Elara had told him about her background. Her academic work suggested deep knowledge of military operations. Her claimed employer was connected to intelligence activities, and her tactical skills were clearly the result of advanced training rather than observation or natural ability. The most disturbing discovery came when Weber ran Elara's identification details through a specialized database available to former special operations personnel. The search returned no direct matches, but it did flag several anomalies in her documentation that suggested professional identity construction. Weber's phone rang as he was reviewing these findings. The caller ID showed a number from Munich's police headquarters. Herr Weber? This is Commissar Brennan with the Munich police. We understand you submitted an inquiry about a student at your academy. That's correct. Routine background verification. I need to ask you not to pursue that inquiry any further. The individual in question is part of an ongoing investigation that involves multiple agencies. Any additional inquiries could compromise sensitive operations. Weber felt his suspicions crystallize into certainty. What kind of investigation? I'm not authorized to provide details, but I can tell you that the person you're asking about has attracted attention at the highest levels of European security services. For your own safety and the security of your academy, I strongly recommend that you treat this student as you would any other and avoid any additional background checks. After ending the call, Weber sat in his office staring at the files he'd assembled. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Elara Novak was an intelligence operative of some kind, working under deep cover for reasons that multiple governments considered sensitive enough to monitor and protect. The question was whether she represented a threat to his academy and students, or whether she was simply someone trying to maintain a low profile for legitimate reasons. His instincts told him she wasn't dangerous to civilians, but his experience warned him that intelligence operatives often brought complications that affected everyone around them. Weber made a decision that reflected both his military training and his responsibility as an educator. He would continue treating Elara as a student, but he would also implement discreet security measures to protect the academy and its other students. He would watch, gather information, and be prepared to act if the situation escalated. What he didn't know was that by making official inquiries about Elara, he had inadvertently triggered alerts within intelligence networks that were already tracking her location. His investigation had been noted, logged, and reported to parties who had very different ideas about how to handle the situation. As Weber locked his files in his office safe, surveillance teams in 3 different vehicles were taking positions around the academy And in Vienna, a young woman named Anya was receiving a phone call that would change her understanding of her sister forever. The quiet training academy, where Elara had hoped to maintain her cover, was about to become the center of an international incident that would force her to choose between the life she wanted and the skills that defined who she really was. The meeting with Kit took place in a 24-hour cafe near Munich's central train station, the kind of anonymous location where late-night conversations blended into the urban background. Elara arrived first, choosing a corner table with clear sight. Lines to all entrances, old habits that she'd never quite managed to shake. Kit appeared at exactly midnight, looking every bit the seasoned intelligence professional in her tailored coat and carefully neutral expression. She slid into the seat across from Elara without preamble. "The message about your sister wasn't from us," Kit said immediately. "Which means someone else has identified the connection and is using it as leverage." Elara felt ice in her veins. "Who? We're working on that. What we know is that at least 3 different intelligence services have become aware of your location and activities. Your instructor's background checks triggered automated alerts, and the security footage from the Academy incident has been analyzed by facial recognition systems across multiple databases." Kit placed a tablet on the table, showing a map of Munich, with various colored markers. Red markers are confirmed surveillance positions around your apartment and the Academy. Blue markers are likely surveillance but unconfirmed. Yellow markers are mobile teams that have been tracking your movements. Elara studied the map, recognizing the professional scope of the operation surrounding her. This is more than simple monitoring. Much more. Someone wants you brought in, and they're prepared to use significant resources to make that happen. Kit's expression grew grim. The threat to your sister suggests they're also prepared to use pressure tactics that cross traditional operational boundaries. Options limited. We can extract you tonight. New identity, new location, complete separation from your current life. But that would mean leaving your sister exposed to whoever is using her as leverage. Elara shook her head immediately. Not acceptable. Alternatively, you can accept reassignment to active status. Official protection for your sister, legitimate. Cover for your skills, and resolution of the political complications around your original extraction. What kind of assignment? Kit hesitated before answering. There's a situation developing in Eastern Europe that requires someone with your specific skill set. High risk, classified at the highest levels, and likely to involve the same type of operations you left the service to avoid. As Kit disappeared into the crowd of late-night travelers, Elara remained at the table, studying the surveillance map and weighing impossible choices. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Your sister's research position has been expedited. She'll be in Munich tomorrow afternoon for her preparatory briefing. The next morning at the Academy, the pressure intensified dramatically. Weber was waiting for her with 2 visitors, a woman in a business suit who introduced herself as Agent Richter from the Federal Criminal Police, and a man in civilian clothes who didn't provide any identification at all. "Miss Novak," Weber said, his tone carefully neutral, "these officers would like to ask you some questions about your background." Agent Richter took the lead, her approach professional but clearly informed by detailed knowledge of Elara's real identity. "We understand you've been less than forthcoming about your previous employment history. I've provided all the information requested for the Academy's enrollment," Elara replied, maintaining her civilian persona despite the obvious futility. "Miss Novak," the unnamed man said quietly, "we know who you are. We know about your Delta Force training, your operations in Syria and Afghanistan, and your unauthorized extraction 3 years ago. The question now is whether you're going to cooperate voluntarily or require more persuasive measures." The direct confrontation shattered any remaining pretense. Around them, other students had stopped their training activities and were watching the exchange with obvious concern. Elara realized that her cover wasn't just blown, it was being deliberately destroyed in public. Perhaps we should continue this conversation privately, she suggested. Perhaps we should, Agent Richter agreed. Your sister Anya will be joining US for the discussion. She's already en route from Vienna. The threat was explicit and terrifying. They had Anya, and they were using her as leverage to force Elara's compliance. Every operational instinct told her to fight, to use her skills to eliminate the threats and protect her sister. But the academy was full of innocent students who could be caught in any violent confrontation. What do you want? Elara asked quietly. Your cooperation with a matter of international security, the unnamed man replied. There's a situation that requires your specific expertise, and certain parties have decided that your retirement from active service has lasted long enough. Weber stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Gentlemen, I'm not sure this is appropriate for my academy. If Miss Novak has legal issues to resolve, perhaps, Herr Weber, Agent Richter interrupted. For your own safety and the safety of your students, I suggest you allow us to handle this matter. The implicit threat was clear. The academy and everyone in it were now part of whatever operation was being conducted around Elara's forced recruitment. Part 9. The CONFRONTAO and Anya arrived at the academy in a black sedan with diplomatic plates, flanked by 2 security officers who made no attempt to appear casual. When she entered the training hall, her confusion was immediately evident. This wasn't the corporate development briefing she'd been expecting. Ella, Anya called out, spotting her sister standing with the group of officials. What's going on? They said there was an emergency meeting about my research position, but this doesn't look like Anya, Elara interrupted, moving toward her sister while being careful not to make any sudden movements that might alarm the surveillance teams. I need you to listen very carefully. These people aren't who you think they are. Agent Richter stepped forward with a professionally apologetic expression. Miss Novakova, I'm sorry for the confusion. We needed to bring you here to discuss some security concerns related to your sister's background. Security concerns? Anya looked between Elara and the officials, her academic mind trying to process information that didn't fit any framework she understood. Ella, what are they talking about? The unnamed man opened a tablet and showed Anya a series of official documents, military service records, classified operation summaries, and photographs that showed Elara in tactical gear. Your sister isn't who she's pretended to be for the past 3 years. Anya stared at the images, her face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and growing shock. These are... Ella, are these real? Elara felt the weight of 3 years of careful deception crashing down around her. Anya, I can explain. Staff Sergeant Elara Torres, the man continued, reading from the documents. Delta Force operator with classified service in multiple theaters. Specialized in high-risk reconnaissance and direct action operations. Officially listed as missing in action following an unauthorized extraction from a classified mission in Syria. Syria? Anya's voice was barely a whisper. Ella, you told me. You worked in corporate consulting. You said you traveled for business conferences. I did work in corporate consulting, Elara said desperately. For the past 3 years, that's exactly what I've been doing. Everything I told you about my current life is true. Protect me? Anya's voice carried a mixture of hurt and anger. By lying to me for 3 years? By pretending to be someone you're not? By giving you the chance to build your own life without being defined by mine, Elara replied. By making sure that my choices didn't limit your opportunities, the unnamed man smiled with calculated sympathy. Because your sister went absent without leave 3 years ago, and has been living under false pretenses ever since. She's technically a deserter from a classified unit. That's not true, Elara said sharply, her operational training finally overriding her civilian facade. My extraction was authorized through proper channels. I fulfilled my service obligations and was granted classified retirement status. Authorized by whom? Agent Richter asked. Because according to our records, no such authorization exists. The unnamed man opened another folder. Miss Torres, you have two options. You can accept reassignment to active duty for a classified operation that requires your specific skills, or you can face prosecution for desertion, identity fraud, and violations of multiple security regulations. He paused, letting the threat sink in. Of course, such a prosecution would also require extensive investigation of anyone who might have aided your illegal civilian status, including family members who might have benefited from resources obtained through fraudulent means. The threat to Anya was implicit but clear. Elara looked at her sister, who was still processing the revelation that 3 years of their relationship had been built on carefully constructed lies. Ella, Anya said quietly, what are you going to do? For the first time in 3 years, Elara felt the familiar weight of impossible choices that had defined her military career. But this time, the stakes weren't just her own life or the success of a mission. They included the safety and future of the person who mattered most to her. I need guarantees, she said to the officials. If I cooperate, my sister remains completely separate from any operational considerations. No surveillance, no pressure, no connection to whatever assignment you have in mind. That can be arranged, Agent Richter replied, assuming your cooperation is complete and ongoing. Elara looked at Anya one more time, seeing the confusion and hurt in her sister's eyes, and made the decision that would determine both their futures. Part 10. The partial admission. I'll cooperate, Elara said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of surrender. But I want everything in writing, guarantees about my sister's safety, the scope of the assignment, and my status afterward. Agent Richter exchanged a glance with the unnamed man before nodding. That can be arranged. However, we'll need your full disclosure about your capabilities, your previous operations, and any contacts you've maintained since your extraction. Elara felt the familiar weight of operational compartmentalization. Even in surrender, she couldn't reveal everything. There were protocols to protect, people to shield, and classified information that extended far beyond her own situation. I can provide details about my training and general operational experience, she said carefully. But specific mission details and classified methodologies remain protected under security oaths that supersede this arrangement. The unnamed man's expression hardened. Miss Torres, you're not in a position to negotiate selective disclosure. Actually, I am, Elara replied, some of her operational confidence returning. Because if you want my cooperation rather than my compliance under duress, you need to recognize that I still have professional obligations that can't be compromised. Weber, who had been quietly observing the exchange, stepped forward. Perhaps we could continue this discussion in my office. The training hall isn't appropriate for sensitive negotiations. As they moved toward Weber's office, Anya caught Elara's arm. Ella, I don't understand what's happening, but I need to know, are you in danger? Elara looked at her sister's worried face and realized that despite the deception, despite the lies, Anya's primary concern was still for her welfare. I don't know, she admitted. But I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you're safe. What about you being safe? That's more complicated. In Weber's office, the atmosphere grew more businesslike as Agent Richter produced official documents and recording equipment. The unnamed man introduced himself as Director Klaus Brennan from a European intelligence consortium that Elara didn't recognize. Let's start with your extraction from Syria, Brennan said. Who authorized it, and through what channels? Elara chose her words carefully. I was extracted by personnel operating under NATO intelligence protocols following a mission that had been compromised. The extraction was conducted to prevent the loss of classified information and to protect ongoing operations in the region. That's remarkably vague, Agent Richter observed. It's as specific as I can be without compromising. Active operations that may still be ongoing, Elara replied. My extraction handler can verify the legitimacy of the operation, but I won't provide names or contact information without proper authorization. Brennan leaned forward. Your handler, would that be Catherine Morrison? The question hit Elara like a physical blow. They already knew about Kit, which meant their investigation had gone much deeper than she'd realized. It also meant that Kit herself might be compromised. I'm not confirming or denying specific individuals, Elara said, but her reaction had already provided the answer they were looking for. Miss Torres, Brennan continued, Catherine Morrison's network has been under investigation for unauthorized extraction operations. Your case isn't isolated. There are at least 6 other operatives who have disappeared from official records under similar circumstances. Elara felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. If Kit's network was compromised, then her own extraction might not have been as legitimate as she'd believed. The possibility that she had been manipulated, that her civilian life had been built on illegal foundations, was devastating. What exactly are you suggesting? She asked. We're suggesting that you may have been the victim of a rogue operation designed to recruit and control former Special Operations personnel for unauthorized activities, Agent Richter said. Your cooperation could help us understand the scope of this network and protect other operatives who may be in similar situations. The offer was seductive, the possibility that she was a victim rather than a perpetrator, that her extraction had been legitimate even if the network facilitating it wasn't. But Elara's operational training warned her against accepting convenient explanations that served her interrogator's purposes. I need to speak with my extraction handler before I can provide any information about networks or other operatives, she said firmly. I'm afraid that's not possible, Brennan replied. Catherine Morrison was taken into custody yesterday evening. She's currently being questioned about her unauthorized activities. The news hit Elara harder than she'd expected. Kit had been more than a handler. She'd been a mentor, a protector, and the architect of Elara's civilian life. If Kit was in custody, then Elara was truly alone navigating this situation. Anya, who had been listening to the exchange with growing alarm, spoke up for the first time. Ella, what does this mean for you? It means, Brennan said before Elara could respond, that your sister's legal status is extremely precarious. If she was extracted through unauthorized channels, then her civilian identity is fraudulent, and she could face serious criminal charges. The threat was clear: cooperate fully or face prosecution that would destroy any hope of civilian life. But the offer of victimhood status suggested they needed her cooperation more than they were letting on. What exactly do you want me to do? Elara asked. There's an operation developing in Eastern Europe, Agent Richter said, producing a classified briefing folder. Intelligence indicates that rogue operatives from Morrison's network are involved in activities that threaten European security. We need someone with your skills and potential access to infiltrate and neutralize the threat. Elara stared at the folder, recognizing the familiar weight of classified materials and operational planning. You want me to hunt down people who might be in the same situation I'm in. We want you to help us distinguish between victims of unauthorized recruitment and willing participants in illegal activities, Brennan corrected. Your cooperation could help protect innocent operatives while eliminating genuine threats. The moral complexity was staggering. Elara would be required to use her skills to investigate and potentially betray people who might be as confused and manipulated as she was. But refusing would mean prosecution and potentially danger to Anya. I need guarantees, she said finally. Written guarantees about my sister's safety, my legal status after the operation, and protection for any operatives who turn out to be victims rather than criminals. That can be arranged, Agent Richter said, contingent on your full cooperation and successful completion of the assignment. Weber, who had remained silent during most of the exchange, finally spoke. Miss Torres, speaking as someone with military experience, I'd advise you to get independent legal counsel before signing any agreements. Brennan's expression darkened. Herr Weber, this is a matter of European security that doesn't require civilian legal complications. With respect, Director. Weber replied, Miss Torres is entitled to legal representation, regardless of the security implications. Elara looked around the room, at Anya's worried face, at Weber's protective stance, at the officials who held her future in their hands. She realized that her partial admission had only deepened the complexity of her situation, and that the choices ahead would require her to navigate between competing loyalties and uncertain legal ground. I'll cooperate, she said finally, but I want everything documented, and I want legal review of any agreements before I sign them. Part 11. The deeper dig. Legal review took 3 days, during which Elara found herself in a peculiar form of house arrest. She was allowed to remain in her apartment, but surveillance teams maintained constant watch, and her communications were monitored. Anya stayed with her, ostensibly for emotional support, but clearly also to serve as additional leverage. During those 3 days, Brennan's team conducted what they termed a comprehensive background assessment. The process involved detailed interviews about her training, her operations, and her knowledge of other operatives. Each session revealed how thoroughly they had already investigated her background. Your Delta Force training records indicate specialization in deep reconnaissance and high-value target operations, Agent Richter said during the second day's session. Specifically, you were trained in infiltration techniques for hostile urban environments. Elara nodded carefully. That's correct, but those skills were developed for legitimate military operations under proper command authority, including Operation Sandstorm in Syria, Brennan added, consulting a thick file, where you spent 17 days behind enemy lines gathering intelligence on terrorist financial networks. The mention of Operation Sandstorm sent a chill through Elara. That mission was classified at the highest levels, and its details should have been accessible only to a very limited circle of intelligence personnel. How do you have access to those records? She asked. Miss Torres, when rogue networks begin recruiting special operations personnel, it becomes necessary to review all relevant operational histories, Brennan replied. What we've discovered is that your extraction from Operation Sandstorm wasn't the emergency evacuation you were told it was. Agent Richter opened a laptop and displayed a series of classified communications. These are messages between Catherine Morrison and her network during your final week in Syria. They show that your extraction was planned well in advance and coordinated with individuals who had no official authority to authorize such operations. Elara stared at the documents, recognizing Kit's communication protocols but seeing them in a context that contradicted everything she'd been told about her extraction. According to these records, her removal from Syria had been orchestrated not to protect her or ongoing operations, but to recruit her for unauthorized activities. This suggests, Brennan continued, that your entire civilian identity was created, not as legitimate retirement cover, but as preparation for future unofficial operations. You weren't rescued, Miss Torres, you were recruited. The revelation was devastating. For 3 years, Elara had believed that her extraction had been a legitimate response to a compromised mission. Learning that it might have been a recruitment operation meant that her civilian life, her relationship with Anya, and her entire understanding of her own situation had been built on deception. What kind of unofficial operations? She asked quietly. Agent Richter displayed another set of documents. Intelligence gathering in European civilian settings, recruitment of other former military personnel, and preparation for operations that required plausible civilian cover. Your training academy enrollment wasn't coincidental. It was part of a larger plan to establish networks of unofficial operatives throughout European security services. Anya, who had been listening to the revelations, With growing horror, finally spoke. Ella, are you saying that everything about your civilian life was fake? I don't know, Elara admitted, feeling the ground disappearing beneath her feet. I thought I was building a real life, but it sounds like I was being prepared for operations I didn't know about. Weber, who had been granted observer status in the debriefings, leaned forward. Miss Torres, from an operational perspective, does any of this feel familiar? Were there instructions or suggestions that seemed like guidance, but might have been mission preparation? Elara thought back over the past 3 years, reconsidering events and decisions through the lens of potential manipulation. Her choice of Munich as a location, her enrollment in the training academy, even her carefully maintained relationship with Anya, all of it could be viewed as elements of deep cover preparation rather than genuine civilian choices. Kit encouraged me to maintain my fitness and tactical awareness, she said slowly. She said it was important for personal security, but she also provided specific recommendations about training programs and skill maintenance, including the Cave Academy where you're currently enrolled, Brennan asked. Yes, she suggested that security training would be a good way to explain any advanced skills I might accidentally display. Agent Richter made notes. So your current situation, being enrolled in an academy where your skills would inevitably be noticed, was orchestrated to create exactly the kind of exposure that would force you into a recruitment conversation. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope and precision. Elara realized that her careful maintenance of cover, her deliberate concealment of her skills, and even her relationship with Weber had all been anticipated and planned by people who understood her psychology better than she understood it herself. What happened to the other operatives in Morrison's network? She asked. That's what we need you to help us determine, Brennan replied. We've identified at least 6 individuals with similar extraction stories, but they've disappeared into civilian identities so deep that conventional investigation can't locate them. We need someone with your background and potential access to their network to make contact and assess the situation. You want me to find them and determine whether they're victims who need protection or willing participants in illegal activities who need to be stopped. Agent Richter corrected. The distinction is crucial for their safety and for European security. Elara looked at Anya, seeing her sister's confusion and fear, and realized that her choices had narrowed to a single option. She could cooperate with Brennan's operation and try to protect both innocent operatives and her sister, or she could refuse and face consequences that would destroy any hope of civilian life for either of them. If I agree to this operation, she said finally, I want guarantees that any operatives who turn out to be victims receive the same protection I'm asking for. And I want assurance that Anya remains completely separate from all operational considerations. Those guarantees can be provided, Brennan said, contingent on your full cooperation and successful completion of the mission. As Elara prepared to sign documents that would return her to operational status, she realized that her 3-year attempt to escape her past had led her directly back into a world that was even more complex and morally ambiguous than the one she'd tried to leave behind. The operation briefing took place in a secure facility outside Munich, where Elara was introduced to the scope of what Brennan's team called Operation Mirror. The conference room walls were covered with photographs, documents, and connection maps showing a network of former special operations personnel who had disappeared into civilian life across Europe. This is Thomas Kellner, Agent Richter said, pointing to a photograph of a man in his 30s. Former British SAS, extracted from Afghanistan under circumstances similar to yours. He's now working as a private security consultant in Vienna. She moved to the next photograph. Maria Santos, yes, the same Maria Santos who's been training at your academy. Former Spanish Special Operations, extracted from Mali. Her current civilian identity is so deep that even we couldn't penetrate it until your instructor Weber identified certain inconsistencies in her background. Elara stared at the photograph, recognizing her combat instructor from the academy. Maria is part of Morrison's network? We believe so, Brennan replied. Which is why your continued enrollment at the academy is crucial. Santos has been carefully monitoring new students, likely looking for individuals with advanced training who might be suitable for network recruitment. The revelation that Maria had been evaluating her during training sessions added another layer of manipulation to Elara's situation. Every interaction, every assessment, every moment of apparent professional development had been part of a larger recruitment operation. Your mission, Agent Richter continued, is to allow Santos to recruit you while maintaining communication with us. We need to understand the network's current operations, their recruitment protocols, and most importantly, the location of Catherine Morrison. I thought you said Morrison was in custody, Elara said. Brennan's expression grew grim. Catherine Morrison escaped from custody 2 days ago. We believe she's attempting to activate sleeper operatives throughout her network for a final operation before disappearing permanently. The stakes had suddenly escalated beyond simple investigation. If Kit was free and activating her network, then Elara might be walking into a situation that involved active operations rather than passive intelligence gathering. What kind of final operation? She asked. We don't know, Agent Richter admitted. But intelligence suggests it involves a high-value target in Eastern Europe and could have significant geopolitical implications. Morrison's network has been gathering intelligence and resources for 3 years. Whatever they're planning, it's been carefully prepared. Elara studied the connection maps, noting the geographic distribution of identified operatives. They were positioned throughout major European cities, often in roles that provided access to security services, government facilities, or international organizations. This isn't just a rogue network, she realized. This is a parallel intelligence operation that's been running independently of any government oversight. Exactly, Brennan confirmed. Which is why we need someone on the inside to help us understand their objectives and prevent whatever Morrison has planned. That afternoon, Elara returned to the academy with new instructions and sophisticated surveillance equipment, disguised as personal items. Her mission was to allow Maria Santos to make contact while documenting every interaction for Brennan's analysis team. The opportunity came during hand-to-hand combat training. Santos approached her after class with what appeared to be routine feedback. Miss Novak, Santos said, I've been observing your progress over the past week. You show unusual aptitude for someone with limited background. Thank you, instructor, Elara replied, maintaining her civilian persona. I'm trying to learn as much as possible. Perhaps you'd be interested in some additional training opportunities. There are advanced programs available for students who demonstrate exceptional potential. The recruitment approach was subtle but unmistakable. Santos was using the same language patterns that Kit had employed during Elara's original extraction, offering opportunities that seemed beneficial while concealing their true nature. What kind of advanced programs? Elara asked. Specialized instruction and techniques that aren't part of standard civilian security training. The kind of skills that could open doors to very lucrative positions with international clients. Santos handed her a business card with contact information for what appeared to be a legitimate consulting firm. If you're interested, call this number tonight. Ask for consultation services and mention that Maria recommended you. As Elara took the card, she noticed Santos studying her reaction with professional intensity. The recruitment was definitely active, which meant the network was still operational despite the investigation. That evening, she made the call while Brennan's team monitored the conversation. The voice that answered was electronically altered, but the operational protocols were familiar. We understand you're interested in expanding your professional opportunities, the voice said. Are you prepared for assignments that might require international travel and discretionary decision-making? I think so, Elara replied carefully. Though I'd need to understand the scope of the work, naturally. We'll arrange a preliminary interview. Someone will contact you tomorrow with meeting details." After ending the call, Elara realized she was about to come face to face with Morrison's network and potentially with Kit herself. The woman who had arranged her extraction and civilian identity was now the target of her investigation. As she prepared for what might be a confrontation with her former mentor, Elara wondered whether Kit had genuinely tried to help her 3 years ago, or whether everything, including her relationship with Anya, had been part of a long-term, operational plan that was only now reaching its conclusion. The recognition that she might have been manipulated from the very beginning was devastating, but it also clarified her mission. She needed to understand the truth about her extraction, protect the innocent operatives who might be victims of manipulation, and prevent whatever final operation Morrison had planned. Tomorrow would determine whether she was hunting a criminal or walking into a trap set by someone who understood her better than she understood herself. Part 13. The full CIA meeting location was a private dining room in Munich's historic Bayerischer Hof Hotel. Elara arrived precisely on time, wearing surveillance equipment that Brennan's team assured her was undetectable. She expected to meet Maria Santos or another network contact. Instead, Catherine Morrison herself sat at the table, looking exactly as composed and professional as she had 3 years ago. "Hello, Elara," Kit said warmly. "You look well." "Civilian. Life has suited you." Elara felt her operational training war with personal confusion. "Kit, I was told you were in custody." "I was, temporarily." Kit gestured to the chair across from her. "Please sit. We have a great deal to discuss, and I suspect your surveillance team is very interested in this conversation." The casual acknowledgement of surveillance suggested that Kit was either supremely confident or operating according to a plan that anticipated official monitoring. "You know about Brennan's operation," Elara said, taking the seat but maintaining alertness for potential threats. "Of course I do. Director Brennan and I have been colleagues for 15 years. Operation Mirror is a joint initiative designed to accomplish objectives that neither of our organizations could achieve independently." The statement hit Elara like a physical blow. "You're working with them?" Kit smiled with genuine warmth. "Elara, did you really think your extraction 3 years ago was unauthorized? Did you believe that a rogue network could operate throughout European intelligence services without official knowledge and support?" The pieces began falling into place with devastating clarity. The investigation, the pressure tactics, even the threats to Anya, all of it had been carefully orchestrated to force Elara back into operational status. "The network is real," Kit continued, "but it's not rogue. It's a deep cover operation designed to infiltrate and monitor actual rogue networks throughout Europe. Every operative in our program has been carefully selected and managed to build the kind of civilian identities that would be attractive to real criminal organizations." "You used me," Elara said quietly. "We gave you 3 years of genuine civilian life while preparing you for an operation that required someone with your specific combination of skills and psychological profile," Kit corrected. "The choice to return to operational status was always yours to make, by threatening my sister, by ensuring that you understood the stakes involved." Kit's expression grew serious. "Elara, there is a real threat. A genuine rogue network has been attempting to recruit our operatives, including you. Your enrollment at the academy wasn't our suggestion, it was theirs." Kit pulled out a tablet showing surveillance footage of Maria Santos meeting with unknown individuals. "The woman you know as Maria Santos is not one of ours. She's part of an organization that has been systematically identifying and recruiting former special operations personnel for activities that genuinely threaten European security." The revelation that her instructor had been evaluating her for an actual criminal network added a new dimension to the operation. Elara realized she had been caught between competing recruitment efforts, one official, one criminal. What do they want? She asked. Intelligence assets who can operate in civilian environments without detection. They're planning something that requires the kind of skills that only former special operations personnel possess. Kit leaned forward. We need you to allow them to recruit you, but as a controlled asset reporting to us. The operation they're planning could destabilize governments throughout Eastern Europe, and if I refuse, then we find another way to stop them. But innocent people will die while we're developing alternative approaches. Your sister will remain safe regardless of your decision, but hundreds of others might not. Elara stared at Kit, recognizing the manipulation even as she understood its necessity. The woman who had been her mentor and protector was asking her to risk everything for an operation that might save lives she would never meet. There's one more thing, Kit said quietly. The real rogue network has identified Anya as potential leverage against you. If you don't accept our protection by agreeing to this mission, they'll attempt to recruit or eliminate her to prevent her from being used against you. The final piece of leverage was perfect and terrible. Elara could refuse the mission, but doing so would leave Anya vulnerable to the very criminals they were trying to stop. How do I know you're telling me the truth this time? Elara asked. Kit smiled sadly. Because this time, I'm giving you all the information up front. No lies, no manipulation, no hidden agendas. Just the choice between accepting a dangerous mission that could save lives or walking away and hoping that someone else can stop what's coming. As Elara considered her options, she realized that her journey from military service through civilian life and back to operational status had been more complex than she'd ever imagined. But for the first time in 3 years, she understood exactly what was being asked of her and why. When do we start? She said finally. Kit's smile was genuine and proud. Welcome back to the service, Agent Torres. Let's go save some lives. 6 months later, Elara stood in a debriefing room in Brussels, having successfully infiltrated and helped dismantle the rogue network that had been planning attacks across Eastern Europe. Anya sat beside her, now fully briefed on her sister's real career and working as a civilian consultant on post-conflict reconstruction, using her academic knowledge to help real communities affected by the operations Elara had helped prevent. The woman who had once wanted nothing more than to be ordinary had discovered that sometimes extraordinary people have responsibilities that transcend personal desires. But this time, she was serving with full knowledge, genuine choice, and the support of the person who mattered most to her. The circle was complete, but it had led somewhere better than where it began. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.